Catalina's fuselage was packed beyond reason. Dozens of men crammed into space meant for 9, oil-slicked bodies pressed together, shivering in the night. Lieutenant Adrian Marks felt his seaplane settling dangerously with each survivor dragged aboard, waves washing through the blisters. Still, they came. Through the darkening Pacific, hundreds more floated among sharks. 4 days since Indianapolis went down. 4 days of sun and madness. But they had hit the limit. Not one more man could fit inside. Behind desperate swimmers, dorsal fins cut through water. Marks had already disobeyed orders by landing in 12-foot swells. He had broken every regulation. But another fin surfaced, and as he saw the fear in the eyes of the men clinging to the edge of his aircraft, Adrian Marks gave an order no other pilot would have dared to give. In the final weeks of World War II, the heavy cruiser USS Indianapolis carried a burden that few aboard could even begin to comprehend. In late July 1945, she was entrusted with one of the war's most critical assignments, to deliver the components of Little Boy, the first atomic bomb that worked, to the island of Tinian in the Mariana Chain. The mission was so secret that not even Captain Charles B. McVeigh III knew exactly what cargo his ship was carrying. The order was simple: sail at maximum speed, do not draw attention, and deliver the cargo intact. Indianapolis carried the scars from countless fights. She was no stranger to combat. She had survived kamikaze strikes, supported landings at Iwo Jima and Okinawa, and had steamed thousands of miles in harm's way. Yet now, with the war pretty much won, she set out on her most important mission, one no one could ever know about. On July 26, 1945, she completed her delivery at Tinian in record time, offloading the uranium and bomb components with no problems. The ship then departed to Guam, where she dropped off Marines before steaming toward Leyte Gulf in the Philippines to get ready for the invasion of Japan that was expected. Unescorted, the Indianapolis pushed westward at a steady 17 knots. The Navy's planners thought the route was relatively safe. Submarine activity had gone down as Japan's fleet lay shattered, and communications were lax, with no one tracking her position very closely. McVeigh ordered a zigzag course sometimes to reduce the chance of torpedo strikes, but the decision was mostly left to him, depending on weather and visibility. On the night of July 29th into the 30th, visibility was excellent. Stars lit the calm Philippine Sea, the moon low on the horizon. Confident and mindful of how tired his crew was, McVeigh ordered the ship to go on a steady course. Most sailors were asleep in their bunks. For the 1,195 men aboard, it was just another humid night at sea. But beneath those placid waters lurked danger. The Japanese submarine I-58, commanded by Captain Mochitsura Hashimoto, had been prowling the area. Hashimoto's submarine was a strong hunter. It had Type 95 torpedoes, and even the experimental Kai-10 man torpedoes. That night, while scanning the horizon, lookouts aboard I-58 spotted the silhouette of a large American warship cutting across the starlit sea. To Hashimoto, it was a golden opportunity. He set the attack course, lining up his prey with methodical precision. At 12:14 a.m. on July 30th, Hashimoto gave the order to fire. 6 torpedoes leapt from the submarine's tubes, streaking silently toward the unaware cruiser. 2 of them hit their mark. The first slammed into the Indianapolis's bow, blowing apart compartments and igniting a chain of explosions. The second struck near the middle of the ship, tearing through fuel and powder magazines. The night sky erupted in flame as the cruiser shuddered violently, decks heaving under the impact. Within seconds, she was mortally wounded. Panic spread as men scrambled to escape the inferno. Alarms blared, bulkheads groaned, and seawater surged into ruptured compartments. The Indianapolis, a warship that had forged its name in the war, was sinking so close to the war's end. Chaos gripped the ship as the crew fought desperately to do something. The first blast had knocked out the communications room, preventing Captain McVeigh from sending a coherent distress call. Power failed across much of the vessel, leaving only fragments of emergency lighting flickering through smoke-filled passageways. Flames raged unchecked, not helped by aviation fuel and munitions that detonated in deafening bursts. Men were hurled from their bunks, blinded by smoke or trapped behind twisted steel. Those on top saw fire belching from the forward deck, the sea around the hull already bubbling with oil and wreckage. In the moments after the second torpedo struck, McVeigh gave the inevitable order to abandon ship. But the order was more symbolic than practical. The Indianapolis was sinking too fast for an orderly evacuation to take place. Lifeboats, secured tightly for sea, were impossible to launch in time. Many were damaged outright in the explosions. Sailors rushed topside, grabbing life jackets if they could, others diving headlong into the dark water. With nothing but an instinct to survive to keep them afloat, the ship listed heavily, groaning like a wounded beast as seawater poured through gaping holes in her side. Within 12 minutes of the torpedo's impact, the Indianapolis rolled and went under. The stern rose high, silhouetted against the burning sea, before the great cruiser plunged into the depths of the Philippine Sea. More than 3,000 men went down with her, trapped below decks, engulfed by fire, or sucked under by the vacuum of the sinking hull. The remainder, approximately 900 sailors, found themselves cast adrift in the open ocean, scattered across miles of dark, oil-slicked water. The scene was nightmarish. Survivors clung to life vests, rafts, or whatever debris floated nearby. Some were covered in oil, coughing and retching as it seeped into their mouths and eyes. Others were already grievously wounded. The darkness was pierced only by the glow of burning fuel and the cries of the injured. For a moment, men tried to gather together, forming clusters for safety, but the vastness of the sea swallowed them, breaking them into dozens of small groups, drifting with the current. As the last bubbles from the ship faded, the realization set in that no one knew where they were. The Indianapolis's movements had not been tracked closely, and headquarters never confirmed the distress signals she'd tried to send. There would be no immediate search, no swift rescue mission launched at dawn. The survivors were alone, hundreds of miles from land, floating in tropical waters teeming with sharks. For those who had leapt from the flames into the sea, the ordeal was only beginning. By the dawn of August 2nd, 1945, the Philippine Sea had become a graveyard. 4 days had passed since USS Indianapolis slipped beneath the waves, and what remained of her crew was dwindling fast. Out of nearly 900 men who had survived the sinking, fewer than half were still alive. Most succumbed to their wounds, hypothermia, drowning, saltwater poisoning, shark attack, or exposure. They floated in scattered clusters around the endless expanse. Their skin blistered from the sun, lips split and blackened from thirst, minds unraveling in fever and hallucination. Constantly darting in to drag away the weakest with terrifying suddenness. It was the fourth morning of torment, and most no longer believed rescue was possible. And then, against all odds, an aircraft appeared. At 10:30 a.m., Lieutenant Wilbur Chuck Gwynn and his co-pilot, Lieutenant Warren Colwell, were flying a routine anti-submarine patrol in a Lockheed PV-1 Ventura bomber. They had launched from Peleliu and were tracing a monotonous circuit of ocean, searching for Japanese submarines that rarely showed themselves anymore. The fight had been uneventful until a technical nuisance intervened. Gwynn left his seat to fix a loose radio antenna in the belly of the aircraft. Peering out at the small ventral observation window as he worked, Gwynn saw something strange on the surface below. A long dark streak staining the water. It looked like an oil slick. His training told him it could only mean one thing: a damaged submarine moving under the surface. Gwynn called for a descent. The Ventura banked and dropped lower, preparing to line up a depth charge run. But as the bomber skimmed closer, shapes began to materialize in the oily water. Not wreckage, not debris. Human heads, dozens of them. Some were motionless, others raised feeble arms in desperate waves. Gwynn's heart lurched. He aborted the attack instantly and grabbed his microphone, quote, "Mayday, Mayday, survivors in the water." The transmission shot across the Pacific ether, an urgent call that would set into motion the first real rescue effort since Indianapolis went down. For the men below, the Ventura's arrival was like a vision from delirium. Some tried to cheer, but they only produced croaks. Others lifted oil-slicked arms toward the sky. The bomber roared overhead, its twin engines echoing across the water, then banked sharply and circled back. Survivors could see its underbelly glinting in the sun. One remembered, quote, "It was like God had finally remembered us." Gwyn dropped a life raft, which splashed into the sea and bobbed among the survivors. But the men were too weak to swim to it. They simply floated, watching in silence as the Ventura circled again and again. Gwyn had no way to help further. His aircraft could not land on water. All he could do was radio their position and stay above as a marker. That call reached Peleliu, where another aircraft crew was ordered to investigate immediately. A PBY-5A Catalina flying boat under the command of Lieutenant Adrian Marks. He and his crew would launch within the hour, racing toward coordinates that promised a grisly scene. The Ventura remained overhead as long as it dared, keeping eyes on the survivors. For the starving, delirious sailors, bobbing helplessly below, the knowledge was enough. Someone had finally seen them. Rescue was no longer a dream. Adrian Marks was a reluctant recruit who turned to the skies after Pearl Harbor pulled the United States into war. By 1945, at 28 years old, he'd become a practice pilot of the Navy's most adaptable machine, the PBY-5A Catalina, a lumbering seaplane as ungainly as it was indispensable. The Catalina was designed to endure. Its immense 104-foot wingspan, like the arms of a gentle giant, lifted the bulky flying boat through endless Pacific skies. 2 Pratt & Whitney radial engines gave it just enough power to cruise for more than 15 hours, with a top speed of 110 miles per hour. It had done everything the Navy asked of it during the war, hunting submarines, prowling coastlines at night as a black cat, and most memorably, descending out of the clouds to save those whom the ocean had nearly claimed. For such missions, it was given the affectionate call sign Dumbo, a name that fit its ungainly appearance, but also its unlikely gift, the power to appear from nowhere and give the doomed a second chance. Marks's Catalina, nicknamed Playmate 2, was amphibious, with retractable wheels for landing strips. It could taxi like a boat, pull men through its blisters and hatches, and store dozens inside its cavernous fuselage. But every Catalina pilot knew one rule above all: never land in the open sea when swells rose higher than a few feet. Hulls split, aircraft flipped, and rescues turned into funerals. Marks set course toward the coordinates broadcast by the Ventura bomber. On the way, he passed the destroyer escort USS Cecil J. Doyle, commanded by Graham Claytor, and radioed what little he knew. There were many survivors in the water, too many to wait for routine clearance. Claytor swung his ship at full speed toward the position. As the Catalina reached the area, Marks and his crew leaned forward to the cockpit glass. The number of men was staggering. Some clung to one another in clusters, others drifted alone, and between them cut the unmistakable shadows of circling sharks. The Catalina circled low over the survivors, dropping life rafts and supply packs. Canvas bundles tumbled from the sky and splashed into the swells, bouncing free of their parachutes. Men paddled weakly toward them, arms reaching, but the ocean was merciless. One raft split open on impact. Others drifted away, faster than the dying men could swim. Many simply stared at the supplies, floating out of reach. Marks gripped the yoke, scanning the water with a pit in his stomach. His orders were clear: stay aloft, drop gear, and mark the position until surface ships arrived. Yet the Doyle and other destroyers were still hours away, and the sun was already angling toward the horizon. Darkness would scatter the survivors, sap the last of their strength, and give the sharks a chance to strike. By morning, hundreds more would be gone. Inside the cockpit, his co-pilot looked at him in silence. Behind them, the crew stared through the blisters, watching the horror unfold. Marks broke the quiet. He told them what he was considering, what every manual, every briefing, and every regulation told him never to do. The waves were rising 12 feet, whitecaps curling over. Trying to land on that could split apart the hull. The plane could pitch forward, dig into the trough of a swell, and cartwheel across the surface. But if they stayed aloft, the men below would undoubtedly perish. Marks asked his crew if they were willing. Not one man objected. He throttled back and nosed the big PBY down and lined her up with the rolling swells. The ocean filled the windscreen, rising and falling like a living thing. At 80 knots, the Catalina kissed the first wave too hard. The hull smacked flat, bounced 15 feet back into the air, then slammed down again with a sound like tearing steel. The aircraft shuddered, rivets screaming, water hammering against her belly. For a heartbeat, Marks thought the plane would fall apart. Then, miraculously, she settled, groaning but intact, bobbing on the swells like the ungainly flying boat she was meant to be. The crew exhaled all at once. They were alive. Against all odds, Playmate 2 had landed safely. Marks wasted no time. He opened the throttle slightly, taxiing the Catalina through the oil-streaked field of survivors. Sharks scattered from the propellers as the plane nosed among the drifting men. Every movement had to be deliberate. A sudden burst of power could swamp the fuselage or send the propellers slicing into the very men he was trying to save. The water around them was alive with cries, with arms reaching upward, with sharks gliding close enough that their dorsal fins cut the surface. Crewmen threw lines and life rings, pulling bodies in through the hatches. Some sailors were so weak they had to be lifted like children, their skin blistered, eyes vacant. The air inside was filled with the stench of oil, sweat, and vomit. The impossible had been done, and now, in the middle of the Philippine Sea, surrounded by sharks and fading light, he and his crew would attempt to save as many men as could be carried. Men were helped aboard, and more sailors desperately swam to the Catalina, afraid that if they didn't board this flight, they would have no strength to survive until the next one came. Marks knew he could not take them all. The sight was overwhelming, hundreds still scattered across the water. He forced himself to make a grim calculation. The men in clusters could still fend off sharks and cling to one another. Those adrift, alone, drifting on the edge of consciousness, would be the first to go. It was cold arithmetic, but at that moment, it was the only way to minimize the losses. Marks maneuvered the seaplane among the survivors. Crewmen reached through the waist blisters, hooking arms beneath sailors' shoulders, dragging them inside, while others pushed from behind. Each man added weight, slowing the aircraft's response, threatening to swamp it with every swell. Yet the rescuers pressed on. They'd entered a rhythm, moving with frantic energy, as though speed alone could beat back the sharks and the fading sun. Soon, the fuselage was full. Men lay 2 and 3 deep on the floor, stacked in rows like cordwood. Still they came. Even when not another single man could be squeezed inside, they came, and Marks did not have the heart to turn them back. Marks gave a final, unthinkable order: lash them to the wings. His crew took parachute cord and straps, securing sailors to the Catalina's broad wingspan, binding them so they would not be washed off by the seas. In time, the aircraft looked like some grotesque vision. Dozens of men stretched across its wings. The seaplane transformed into a raft bristling with human forms. But the Catalina, already damaged from its violent landing, was now too heavy, too battered to ever fly again. He traded the sky forever for the chance to buy these men a single night of life. By the time the last survivor was tied down to the Catalina's wings, night had fallen. The aircraft now carried more than 60 souls, its own crew, plus the 56 men dragged from the sea. The swells rocked the fuselage, slapping against seams that had begun to leak. Marks realized the aircraft would never fly again. Inside, the survivors cried quietly in the dark. Some whispered deliriously about home, about wives and mothers, about fresh water. Others simply groaned. Every breath an effort. Outside, those lashed to the wings lay motionless, spray breaking over them with every swell. The cords kept them from sliding into the sea, but nothing could keep them from facing the raw weather and seeing the shark fin circle below. The crew did what they could. They gave the weakest the last of their drinking water, tended to wounds with scraps of cloth, and tried to keep the rescued men conscious. But exhaustion pressed on them all. With the engines shut down, the plane rocked silently in the dark. For many, hope wavered again. They had escaped the jaws of the sharks, only to meet their end in the hold of a crippled seaplane. Then, sometime after midnight, a new light appeared on the horizon. At first, it was mistaken for a star, but it grew brighter and sharper until men began to stir and point. It was the searchlight of USS Cecil J. Doyle, slicing across the night. Commander Graham Claytor had made a dangerous choice. He'd ordered his destroyer escort to switch on its lights and sweep them across the sky, deliberately exposing his ship to any enemy submarine that might still lurk nearby. But he reasoned that if men were dying in the water, their morale and their survival mattered more than concealment. The gambit worked. For the survivors, that single beam of light was salvation made visible. Cheers erupted inside the Catalina, hoarse voices breaking into sobs and prayers. On the wings, men too weak to speak lifted their heads toward the glow. Marks himself felt a weight lift as Cecil's outline sharpened against the horizon. The destroyer came alongside in the small hours, sailors leaning over her rails to haul the rescued up from the drifting seaplane. One by one, the 56 survivors Marks had saved were transferred aboard, where medics rushed to tend their burns and dehydration. The Doyle and other responding ships spread out across the sea, plucking the last survivors from the water. When dawn broke, the full scale of the tragedy was clear. Of the 1,195 men who had sailed out in Indianapolis, only 316 were alive. The rescue was complete, but the Catalina's part in it was over. She'd given her last strength, and now she drifted, her hull splitting, unfit ever to fly again. The order was given to scuttle her with gunfire. Playmate 2, the flying boat that had defied orders and saved dozens of lives, slipped beneath the waves she dared to land upon. Two of those who were pulled aboard Doyle would soon perish from their wounds, reducing the count of final survivors further still. The others, nearly 900 sailors, had been lost to torpedoes, fire, thirst, exposure, and sharks. It was the worst single loss of life at sea in the history of the United States Navy. For Adrian Marks and his crew, the return to Peleliu was somber. They were lauded, yes, promoted and decorated. Admiral Chester Nimitz himself awarded Marks the Air Medal for his extraordinary courage. The official report commended him for initiative, judgment, and disregard for his own safety. Yet Marks never forgot the faces of those he could not save. In the search for accountability, the Navy brought Captain Charles McVeigh to trial, charging him with negligence for not zigzagging his cruiser. It was the only time in U.S. naval history that a commanding officer was court-martialed for losing his ship in combat. Even the commander of the submarine that had sunk Indianapolis testified that zigzagging would not have mattered, but the verdict fell heavily on McVeigh. He carried that weight until he took his own life in 1968. Decades later, Congress and the Navy would clear his name, but for survivors, the bitterness remained. As for Marks, he returned home to Indiana after the war, hung up his uniform, and resumed life as a small-town attorney. He lived quietly, rarely speaking of the rescue. Only years later did his neighbors and friends learn what he had done in the war. At a 1975 reunion of Indianapolis survivors, his voice broke as he stood before the men he had saved. Quote, "I met you on a sparkling, sun-swept afternoon of horror. I have known you through a balmy tropic night of fear. I will never forget you." The room fell silent, every man remembering the moment when a white-winged seaplane descended from the sky to challenge the ocean itself. The PBY Catalina has long since passed into history, but among aircraft enthusiasts and naval historians, Playmate 2's final mission stands apart. It was proof that a slow, ungainly flying boat, dismissed by some as obsolete even before the war ended, could become the sharpest edge of hope in the most desperate hour.